Into the Wild, Forest of Secrets, The Darkest Hour. If you know any Warriors book titles, these are likely to be very familiar to you. It's no secret that the first arc is the most well-known, and well-sold, arc in the series. But how does it hold up, now that we have so much more Warriors material to compare it to? I think the only fair place to start would be with our protagonist, considering how completely centered the arc is around him. Firepaw/Heart/Star, Huron known as Fireheart, is a fairly basic, modern hero guy. He's strong, brave, caring, and willing to break the rules when he feels it is the right thing to do, but also often stupid, especially when the plot requires it, and sometimes he shows himself to be reckless, tries to solve every problem on his own, or gets bogged down by his insecurities about being a kitty pet. This isn't a bad character, and putting aside the times when he felt distinctly out of character, it's difficult to dislike him, but it's nothing new. The main heroes in tons and tons of our classic media, new and old, follow this character formula as well, and Fireheart doesn't do much to differentiate himself from the characters who came before. When comparing him to some of the complex and entertaining protagonists who will come later in the series, such as Jay Feather and Clear Sky, he simply doesn't grab our attention as well. That being said, there is a reason that Fireheart was chosen as the protagonist for this arc, because he works as a great introduction to the world. It may seem second nature to those of us fans who have been engaging with this material for 5+ years, but Warriors has quite a lot of material to introduce. From the hierarchy of clan roles to the natures of each clan, to the territories, to the warrior code and special in-universe terms for everything. To introduce readers to this bombardment of information, the Aarons needed a point of view character who was not only new to the world, but curious and eager to learn about it. They needed a cat who would have both a reason and the will to explore numerous areas of the forest, and speak to cats even outside their own clan. And they of course needed a cat who would be able to stand against the villain as a hero, preferably as the single main driving force so they wouldn't have to split attention between multiple point of view or main characters. All told, Fireheart was the natural fit for their requirements, but that doesn't make him particularly interesting in comparison to the world he shows us. And that world is quite a rich one. The interclan relations, histories, religion, and differences between the clans all speak to a wide and engaging culture that clearly invested many readers, given how long we've all been willing to stick around in it. Many of these aspects were only touched on partially, to varying degrees, and with some inaccuracy compared to what would be solidified later in the arc or the series. However, this could itself be seen as another draw, since it gives an opportunity for expansion later on in further arcs, supplementary material, and, of course, fan content. And the power a single cat can gain in this society allows for an array of tense stories. As far as this arc's plot is concerned, it's a pretty coherent, self-contained story. Broken Star, Tiger Star, and Scourge are hardly the most complex villains you'll ever see, but they serve their functions well, as did most of the support and side characters in ThunderClan and beyond. All 3 non-ThunderClan clans were involved and characterized to some extent, with at least 3 noteworthy members in each clan that served the plot. The plot was also simple enough that it had time to work in plenty of engaging moments for side characters, like Brightheart, Longtail, Speckletail, and Tawnypaw. But it certainly wasn't perfect. A Dangerous Path in particular became something of a convoluted mess on the plot half, and many of the character beats centered around Fireheart, especially in his interactions with Sandstorm, seemed to butcher his character and make him seem stupid at best and cruel at worst. But the biggest issue comes in the characters that aren't Fireheart. This arc clearly has the goal of making a story about a bustling community where dramatic things could happen at any time, rather than solely telling story beats and skipping over any focus on the cast. They make an attempt at involving as many of the clan cats as they can in their own stories, which have varying levels of connection to the larger Fire vs. Tiger plot, but these side characters have little attention given to them. They are only given enough book time to do exactly what they need to do for their arcs, with no introductions or follow-throughs. As an example, Brightpaw and Swiftpaw weren't given any attention until the dog attack had already occurred, so we only got to care for them after the fact, and not because we regretted losing the place they must have held in the clan, off-screen. In fact, they aren't the only cats in this category. Snowkid and Gorsepaw were only introduced for the sake of dying, barely being mentioned, let alone speaking. Their stories are only tragic because we see other characters who presumably had connections to them are sad. We don't feel the grief ourselves since we don't know who they were. And you didn't have to die to have your chance at development taken away. Sandstorm and Dustpelt, 2 of only 4 other characters who are apprenticed with Fireheart and who really should be important characters throughout the arc, barely got any time to establish themselves as bullies in the first and second books before that stopped being who they were. Because of this, we can't fully feel the weight of that development, or track exactly when or how much their feelings changed. Another example is, of course, Tawnypaw, whose story in this arc and beyond always sounded interesting, and unfortunately was always cut from the story. The most development we get for her is, like Bright Paws and Swift Paws, told after the fact by third-party characters, in this case Smallear and Bramblepaw. Knowing exactly why Tawnypaw chose to stay with her father in ShadowClan rather than having to guess would have made Bramblepaw's journey even more interesting, and strengthened both of their characters for the future. But none of these characters were deemed deserving of development in the narrative, because this story isn't about them. Their short events are flavor for the clan that Fireheart lives in. This is his story above all, and if you didn't get attached to his particular brand of sometimes stupid stock heroism, you might come away without feeling satisfied by the characters, especially if one of the other characters intrigued you before they were shoved back into the sidelines. Although there is one other underlying issue in the characters that I've danced around all this time: gender. Even putting our male lead Fireheart aside, this arc consistently provides more and bigger roles to their male characters than their females. The Toms always talk more on average than the she-cats, and even the diversity of character types is significantly wider on the male side. Toms have the wise senior warriors, the eager young Toms, the ambitious villains, the disloyal suck-up, the serious worker, the loyal but traditional, the laid-back brat, the love-struck jokester, and many more. Meanwhile, for the she-cats, we have Sandstorm, Bluestar, Yellowfang, and Cinderpelt, and just about every other cat is a stock queen, a stock mate, a stock good cat with no interests of her own, or is shoved to the sidelines so much that you never get to see their story. Tawnypaw, as I mentioned, has her whole story told through other cats and doesn't get to provide her own feelings on the subject. And, in my opinion, most egregiously, even when Brightheart is in her recovery and is creating new battle moves to beat even Fireheart with her one good eye, both the credit and the speaking time is given to Cloudtail, her mate. Multiple whole scenes pass where Fireheart comes to check on Brightheart's fighting prowess, and Brightheart herself doesn't get to speak. Instead, Cloudtail answers every question directed at her, and Brightheart just nods or smiles. Now, I do love Brightheart and Cloudtail as a couple. I think it's very sweet that he was willing to stick up for her and that she was given the space and time to grow stronger for her own sake since then. But I could not believe how much attention that should have gone to her was instead given to Cloudtail. This sort of gender disparity does pop up through the entirety of the series in different forms, but the first arc is a really glaring example of it. And it certainly doesn't help the arc's general problems with giving support characters time and complexity. Of course, some of the intensity of these problems may simply be due to the time we've had to digest this story. It's both the most read arc and the most reread arc, so it's easy and necessary to catch these early mistakes in order to look forward into the other works in the Warriors world. It's not a bad arc, really. Our protagonist was proactive, usually, and flawed without being insufferable. Besides him, there are plenty of side character moments to love. The story is compact, but coherent and interesting, and there are even some tearjerker pieces of writing, such as Yellowfang and Bluestar's deaths, or the speeches Fireheart makes to himself during the battle with BloodClan. It's a sweet little story, and I understand why so many people, myself included, decided to read it, even if this was the only Warriors content they ever read. If you have any interest in more detailed explanations of each book, I've just finished all 6 of these books in my Trip Through Time series, which I have linked below. But even if you don't watch those, I encourage you to think back on this arc, both its flaws and highlights that made you love the series in the first place. It's worth that much. Thank you for watching, and always remember to keep your heroes close to heart. That was a bad joke.